Happy Friday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. I'm not going to let a blowout loss by the Atlanta Braves last night do anything to dampen my spirits. I am shot out of a cannon here today because when you look ahead of the next few weeks of the Georgia Bulldogs, things are about to really get fun. Night game tomorrow night. Maybe it won't be 100 degrees by the time the game kicks off, although I can't confirm that given how hot it's expected to be during the day there. Lighting up Sanford for the fourth quarter. Heading towards Baton Rouge next week for DawgNation Invasion. What a time to be a Georgia Bulldog fan. We're going to talk about it all right now. And the other thing that's not going to dampen our spirits around here is the decommitment of four-star cornerback Jalen Perry. We'll have Jeff Sintel on the program. We'll talk to him a lot about that, and we'll be very candid about the entire thing. So if you're interested in what's going on with Perry, Jeff will be a good person to talk to. We've also got another special guest today, Tom Hart, the guy broadcasting the game on Saturday night on the SEC Network. He'll be with us on the program here today, too. So it's a fun show coming up. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, begins right now.
From DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One thing I can promise you is there will be a lot coming up in a couple of minutes on Jalen Perry, the four-star defensive back who has decommitted from the Georgia program. That happening last night. It's 2 decommitments in 1 week for Georgia. That gets the attention of the mainstream media, but y'all know. Those of you who are plugged in, you know that the mainstream media, in many cases, the last ones to sort of figure out the real story when it comes to recruiting stuff. So we won't be mainstream here today. We'll be very deep into the subject with a guy who knows it great, and that is Jeff Sintel, DawgNation's recruiting insider. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna save the Jalen Perry commentary for when Jeff comes on the program about 15 minutes from right now. You want to hear from him on this anyway, and I can promise you I'll ask him every question you want to ask, including where Georgia goes now, and I think some of you already have some ideas on that, so we'll do that coming up in a couple of minutes with Jeff Sintel. There's also big news on a 5-star UGA commit and Jaden Hazelwood as well, who recently decommitted from Georgia. All that's coming up with Jeff Sintel. We've also got another very special guest on the program today, Tom Hart, who's going to call the game on Saturday night on the SEC Network. He's the play-by-play broadcaster there. He's going to be on our program here today, and he has some really interesting things to say about Jake Fromm, Justin Fields, and everything else that could go down between Georgia and Vanderbilt on Saturday night. So stick around for that. Before that, if you don't mind, I kind of want to start in a little bit of a lighthearted way here. I feel like we've been a little bit serious and heavy this week. So I want to harken back to a year ago. Do you remember the weird drama that unfolded last year as Georgia was getting ready to take on Vanderbilt? One of the things I typically do from time to time is when Georgia's got an SEC game coming up, I generally try to monitor the other side, listen to what the coach says, read the other newspapers, the other websites, the information, the media coming out of Georgia's opponent. I like to try to keep my ear to the ground on that because you never know when you're going to hear something that's kind of interesting. And last year I was listening to Derek Mason, the Vanderbilt coach's press conference leading into the game against Georgia, and all of a sudden, most of these things are just very tedious and boring. This is not glamorous work, sort of drag your way through these press conferences week after week after week. For the most part, they're pretty boring. But at one point, Mason kind of started cutting a promo on Kirby Smart about the fact that he felt like that Smart was trying to trick him in regards to Jake Fromm and Jacob Eason. It was this completely different scenario than you typically hear from an SEC coach, most of which go out of their way not to say anything. But Mason almost seemed like a year ago like he was trying to pick a fight with Kirby Smart over Smart's, what Mason thought of as an attempt to trick him when it comes to which quarterback he was going to play, Jake Fromm, or at the time, Jacob Eason, who was coming back from injury. This was actually fairly fun a year ago. Do you remember when Derek Mason said this?
I believe, Fromm, is the guy. I believe Eason's an extremely talented quarterback, but that's up to Kirby, who he decides to go with. He's not fooling me. If that's what we think we're doing here. That young man, Fromm's won ball games. He just came off a 48-0 win. We can quit with the coaching dramatics. When it's all said and done, they're 5-0. They're a good football team with lots of talent. They're playing extremely well. And, hats off to Kirby because he's done a great job.
At the time, this was completely inexplicable to me. Why Derek Mason was bowing up over something like Jake Fromm or Jacob Eason. First of all, no one within DawgNation thought that Jacob Eason was going to play in that game really against Vanderbilt. I think we all thought that was Jake Fromm's team at the moment because of everything that Georgia had been through up until that point. Plus, it's not like those two quarterbacks were all that different anyway. Fromm and Eason essentially would run the same offense and kind of play it the same way. Now, Fromm certainly gave Georgia an extra spark when he came in versus Appalachian State, but overall, Eason and Fromm aren't dramatically that different of a quarterback. This got to be such a big deal a year ago, though, that when Kirby Smart spoke to the media during that same week, he was actually forced to respond to what Mason had to say, and this whole thing was just kind of surreal to me that this turned into such an issue. But a year ago, Kirby Smart was having to respond to the challenge from Derek Mason not to go into any coaching dramatics against the Commodores. Here's Kirby Smart's response then.
Again, Derek Mason's entitled to his opinion. Derek Mason's not. He's not at our practices. He doesn't watch our practice tape that I know of, so I'm not really concerned with those comments.
I mean, I kind of chuckle when I think about the whole thing because obviously Georgia and Vanderbilt aren't opponents that typically have a whole lot of beef against each other, but in this case last year over the quarterback issue, they kind of did, so much so that, basically Kirby Smart has to rebuke him with the you coach your team, I'll coach my team type response there. This year, though, the back and forth between Mason and Smart has been a lot less intense, I guess. And the coaching dramatics that Derek Mason alluded to with his comments in 2017, he didn't really say the same thing this year, even though this year the quarterback situation for Georgia might actually be a little bit more dramatic. And the knowns when it comes to the Georgia quarterbacks might actually be less for this year's game than they were a year ago. But Derek Mason didn't really go down the same road, instead just choosing to give a little credit to Justin Fields, who he's sort of assuming will play on Saturday. Here is Derek Mason on that.
You're going to be playing two quarterbacks because, we're probably going to see Fields as well. So, when you talk about a dual-threat quarterback who can run and, our rush lanes and our ability to get the quarterback on the ground, it's been pretty much non-existent. I think we had 1 sack last week. So the challenge is really, for us to play our best ball.
So what's interesting to me about this is that if there was ever a time for Derek Mason to talk about the coaching dramatics, I think the chances of coaching dramatics this year when it comes to the quarterbacks against Vanderbilt are far higher than it was a year ago when it was Fromm's team, and even if Eason played, the offense would, for the most part, look the same. But this year, based on what we just saw against Tennessee, Justin Fields is going to come into the game against Vanderbilt at some point, and when he does come in, the offense is going to be a good bit different. There is going to be more runs from the quarterback, and there's going to be an extra dimension that has to be defended. Jake Fromm remains and continues to be a very good quarterback, starter, passing and throwing the football. But when Justin Fields comes in, as Derek Mason said, you got to start worrying about your running lanes. You got to start worrying about a whole lot of different kind of stuff. And Kirby Smart, when it comes to tipping his hand or revealing his cards about which guy's going to be in at which point and how much Justin Fields is going to play, this is actually the year in which Kirby Smart is going through some coaching dramatics, because he did very little, if you want to go back to a Saturday night after the game against Tennessee, to kind of answer the question of how much we'll see these two quarterbacks, what the split's going to be. I mean, this is actually an example of coaching dramatics from Kirby Smart.
I thought both guys did some good things. I think Justin provided us a spark that we needed at times, and he's a very diligent worker. He's been meeting extra. He's coming in to learn things and pick them up, and he gives us an asset to the offense that sometimes provides us a spark we may need. I thought Jake did a great job commanding the offense, understanding where to go with the ball. If we don't give up pressure on some of those third downs, he probably even hits even bigger plays, because there were some plays out there that we left hanging that a couple of them he didn't have a chance because the pressure in the pocket. So we got to do a better job protecting him. But I was pleased with both those guys play. They're good football players.
Was it the plan, Coach, to get him in for one snap? I know you said in the past his nerves are a little high when he first comes in. Was it the plan to get him in for one snap, get him back out?
The plan is there is no plan. Next question.
I mean, the plan is there is no plan. That's not just a message to the media and fans. It's a message to Derek Mason as well of, hey, you don't know what I'm going to do from one series to another. I mean, some of the media even called it kind of confusing the way that Smart was using Fromm and Fields on Saturday, ushering them in within the same drive, which is not something you typically see with programs who will play two quarterbacks. But Fromm and Fields both seem to be handling this with a lot of poise right now, and I do think it legitimately makes for a tough decision for Derek Mason to make on Saturday. A really good defensive mind, but how do you defend Georgia even within the same drive when you may be facing both quarterbacks? So it's ironic here. Derek Mason talked a lot last year about coaching dramatics, and yet there were none, nor did any Georgia fan think there would be any going into the game against the Commodores. But on Saturday night in Sanford Stadium, there are actually probably going to be a few coaching dramatics. Now, I don't mind telling you, I am fascinated by this entire storyline. I'm entertained by both Jake Fromm and Justin Fields for very different reasons. and how Kirby Smart and Jim Chaney, the quarterback's coach James Coley, how they meld these two guys together into a Georgia offense that can be very potent and very dangerous is something I cannot wait to see. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Marco's Pizza. Good to have you with us. No matter how you get to us today, live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and in podcast form wherever podcasts can be found, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're just really glad you have found us today and really appreciate Marco's Pizza being a part of the program as well. And this weekend, great chance for you to say hello, Primo, by taking advantage of the great offer that I've been telling you about for quite some time now. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for $6.99 each. You're watching football, you're watching a little playoff baseball, you're watching the MMA stuff on Saturday night for those of you that are into that kind of thing. It's all there for you this weekend in terms of a great sporting landscape. And when I think about watching sports, I also thinking about sitting there with a little Marco's Pizza and authentic Italian quality pizza at a great price. It's hard to beat that. So go to marcos.com and take advantage of that great offer. 2 medium, 2 topping pizzas for just $6.99 each. With 2 pies like that, everybody in the house can be satisfied, especially when you think about that Gianmarco family recipe and the sauce, the 3 cheeses blended and melted together. It is all outstanding stuff. All right, coming up later on, as I said off the top of the show, we are busy today with 2 really good guests. Tom Hart, who will call the game on Saturday night on the SEC Network. He'll be with us here in a few minutes to give his preview of Georgia and Vanderbilt. As you might imagine, Tom, an outsider to DawgNation, but an insider in terms of knowing a lot about the SEC, is also fascinated with what he's going to see from Fromm and Fields on Saturday. So we'll talk to him about that and a lot more of the subjects around the game when it comes to this Saturday night. But also before that, Jeff Sintel here in just a couple of minutes to look at the decommitment of Jalen Perry, the 4-star defensive back, the latest on the reaction to Jaden Hazelwood, who was interviewed by Jeff this past week on the same day, essentially, that he decommitted from Georgia. Jeff had some interesting comments from Hazelwood. We'll hear from Jeff, his reaction to his interview with Hazelwood, and a bunch more with Jeff Sintel coming up here in just a moment. With that said, though, let me turn my attention back to the Dogs in the field for a moment and on the other side of the ball. Talked a lot about offense off the top here with the 2 quarterbacks. Let me look on defense here for a moment. And what I think is quickly becoming one of the cool stories around Georgia football, and I thought that Kirby Smart summed this up really well. After the Missouri game, in which DeAndre Walker really stepped up and showed out in a big way, really leading the way for the Georgia pass rush thus far in 2018, Kirby Smart gave him some compliments, and he also gives him some constructive criticism within this quote as well. But listen to one of the points that Smart brings up about DeAndre Walker, that he is a guy that can be a little overlooked at times, not just around the SEC, but maybe even within the fan base of DawgNation here. I loved what Kirby Smart recently had to say about DeAndre Walker, and I'm playing this clip for you for a specific reason, which I'll explain in a moment. But for now, here's Kirby on Walker.
I think DeAndre's grown into this role. I thought he had his best game of the 4 he's played last week. I would have expected nothing less because he's a leader on our team. He's a very motivated kid. He plays so hard. It's important to him. He still has room for improvement. He'll be the first to tell you he had some missed assignments in the game, that he didn't do what he was supposed to do. He didn't play with discipline. But overall, he had a very productive game, mainly because of how hard he plays. He's a tough, good football player, winner that probably a lot of people have overlooked throughout his career because he's behind other guys. But he had a good game the other day, and certainly appreciate the production he had in the game because when you ask other coaches, he's hard to block.
I think that's a really interesting phrase that Kirby Smart uses there, that over the course of his career, DeAndre Walker may be a guy that probably a lot of people have overlooked. Sometimes even Georgia fans, not because they don't appreciate Walker, but because they saw his stats produced in maybe situational pass rush opportunities, and they wondered, could he be the guy when he was on the field a lot more, asked to carry a larger load? Well, thus far, he's done exactly that, and if he had been maybe the rest of us guilty of overlooking him in the past, that may not quite be the case anymore. I saw where ESPN.com does one of those cool series where they look at an issue facing each of its top 25 teams, and they gave out September MVP awards for all the teams in the top 25, and for number 2, Georgia, the September MVP, according to ESPN, is outside linebacker DeAndre Walker, maybe finally getting some of the attention we want to see him get. Here's how Alex Scarborough wrote about Walker on ESPN.com. He says, heading into the season, if you saw a guy named DeAndre would be Georgia's September MVP, you would have assumed that running back DeAndre Swift would have been that guy, and Swift has played well thus far, but it's just that Walker, a senior outside linebacker, has been an undeniable difference maker. He's off to a phenomenal start, leading the team in sacks, tackles for loss, and quarterback hurries. Once again, that's Alex Scarborough writing that for ESPN.com. I'll go a step further than Scarborough. I think you can make a case that before the season started, and I say this with all due respect to Walker, he may have been the third most famous DeAndre on this team. DeAndre Baker, the cornerback, I think clearly got more attention than that, and you can make a case that he's also Georgia's September MVP, by the way. But he was a more famous DeAndre, and DeAndre Swift, the running back, probably was as well. So just by virtue of having the same name as two other very good Georgia players, DeAndre Walker might occasionally get overlooked. But because of the way that he's playing right now, putting him in the conversation as Georgia's September MVP is a pretty good decision there by ESPN. And for those of us that appreciate the work that Walker's doing, seeing him get a lot of love from the worldwide leader in sports is not a bad thing either. So congratulations, I guess, to DeAndre Walker on that. With that said, let's transition here. Let's do our Kroger checklist and look ahead to what's going to be a busy Saturday in Athens tomorrow. Kroger involved in a lot of that, including before the game. I hope you'll join us approximately 5 p.m. I always say approximately because we'll try to get on the air as quickly as we can, but we'll do that a few minutes before the start of the dog walk, which is set to go at 5:15 tomorrow for our Kroger kickoff, and we'll preview the game. Jeff Sintel will be there. We'll show you the dog walk there live as a part of that. It all starts around 5 p.m. for that. And, of course, it's the kickoff between Georgia and Vanderbilt, TV, 7:30 p.m., radio on News 95.5 and AM 750 WSB. That goes at 7:30. And then tomorrow, immediately after the game, it's our Northside Hospital postgame show live from the UJ bookstore. And I do mean immediately. I know some of you have been saying that we've been a little late getting the postgame show on the air. We're going to scrap our old format and where we kind of waited for Kirby Smart to end, and we're going to go hard off the top of the hour right there after the game ends, so you can check us out for that. We appreciate you checking out the Kroger checklist every Friday here on DawgNation Daily. And speaking of Kroger, they've got a good invitation for you right now. You can kind of come out and join your local Kroger chef for a guided kids cooking experience, including an apron and patch, chef's hat, recipe card box, and spatula. It's all just $7. In October, Kroger Chef Jr. is going to be featuring Monster Mash cookies on Saturday, October the 8th, and October the 20th. You can visit KrogerChefJr.com to find the Kroger store closest to you that's participating in the Kroger Chef Jr. program. This is a really fun thing for you and your kids, so make sure you check that out. It's great to have you with us here on DawgNation Daily. Hope you enjoy Jeff Sintel right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
All right, Jeff Sintel, a lot of people have a lot of questions. You're the guy we turn to when it comes to stuff like this. You know what the news is. No time for hellos here. Let me just dive into the Jalen Perry decommitment. And, Jeff, there's no reason why we should not be very candid about all of this. If you pay attention to our forum, Jeff, at forum.DawgNation.com, right now you see Georgia fans divided into two distinct camps. There are a camp of Georgia fans who may be worried about a second decommitment within the frame of 1 week and say, oh, no, the sky is falling. What's going on with Georgia recruiting? You have another camp of Georgia fans who are very confident to say, well, if Georgia and Perry are parting ways, that must mean good news for some of these other elite defensive backs that we've talked about, that maybe Georgia has its eyes on other players here. Those are the very common conversations, and as I said, you can see those playing out at the forum at forum.DawgNation.com. Can you separate fact from fiction for us on this? Which of the two camps, the camp that's worried or the camp that's confident, which of the two camps has it most right when it comes to Jalen Perry, who decommitted from Georgia last night?
All right, Brandon, let's just jump right into it with our Indy 500 glasses on here. Number one, you can separate fact from fiction, and you have to sprinkle in opinion. Number one, Jalen Perry decommitted from Georgia last night. That did not set off any alarms. When the reporter, member of the reporter tribe like myself, would like to go to the source and be able to ascertain perhaps just exactly what went down, Jalen Perry has requested no interviews in this time. That's kind of standard procedure after a decision quite like this. Here's what we know. He had been committed to Georgia since October of 2017. He was an in-state recruit, and he had been a long-standing commitment. To me, that is where we start having to blur the line between fact and theory. What I go off of here is the perception that you have to think about whether this was a decommitment where Jalen Perry thought it was in his best interest to go play somewhere else other than Georgia, or you also have to think whether or not other schools were just targeting him and giving him more attention than Georgia was. Here's what we know from last year. Georgia saw commitment from the state of Virginia, the state of Louisiana, the state of Florida, even an in-state commitment in the state of Georgia, who were committed to the Bulldogs for a time, but then decommitted and left the commitment board for the class of 2018. What did the University of Georgia do? The University of Georgia simply went out and rebuilt that class with higher-rated players. If we're going to extrapolate, this feels a lot like, to me, what happened in 2018. I do feel this is the ugly side of recruiting, the business side of recruiting. I'm going to state the following facts very quickly. When you follow and cover Georgia recruiting, you can expect one uncertain absolute truth to happen. Kirby Smart and this staff will sign the very best 25 players it possibly can every cycle, or as many players as they can to get them right up to the 85 mark of NCAA allotted scholarships. Period, point blank, done.
Yeah, and you're exactly right about that. And, Jeff, you know, because you and I have talked about this a lot off the air, this is something that leaves me feeling very conflicted because, on the one hand, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. Our audience knows the story here. I want Georgia to sign the best 25 players that it can, and I love the fact that Kirby Smart's aggressive in that pursuit. And yet, on the other hand, I've lived in the Atlanta area my entire life. I know people personally that know a lot of these recruits really well and consider them almost like extended family. And I know the pride these people feel when these young men get that opportunity to go play for the hometown, home state school here. And when that doesn't work out, there is a part of me that's disappointed on their behalf here. So it's possible to feel two things at once, I think. And on the one hand, I will admit, I want to win national championships. I want to see Georgia do that, and I want to see the players brought into the program that really makes that more possible. And yet there's always going to be a part of me that would say, boy, I'd love to see that hometown guy get a chance to do that, whether it be Perry in this case or some other hometown guys that, you know, we've either talked about in the past or could be talking about in the future. I know people who know them, and I know, you know, the schools where they come from, and it's a big deal to be invited to go play football at the University of Georgia. And when it doesn't work out, it's disappointing. And so, you know, I have sympathy for the people when it's not working out the same way I have excitement about what's to come for those 25 scholarship spots.
Yeah, Brandon, there's definitely a moral dilemma here. I see two big thought tree discussions here for everybody to elaborate, weigh in on in the comment section. Number one, do you want to build the most ultimate Death Star type program that will demolish everything in its path? Obviously, that's a flawed metaphor with Death Star because we know what happened to the Death Star in Star Wars mythology. or do you want to, and that's Brandon's favorite metaphor. I like bringing that out because I'm speaking DawgNation Daily right now.
Sure.
Perhaps we should probably come up with something more powerful like Thanos and his Infinity Gauntlet. But you want Georgia to sign the 25 best players. But you also want this program to do right by the players that potentially would play for it. You want to do the right thing. And sometimes in the world of recruiting, you can't have both. You can't have that cake. You can't have that peach cobbler and eat it too. So that's one thing. And, you know, when we start talking about this, and it is the dark underbelly of recruiting, the pros, if Georgia perhaps made it clear to Jalen Perry, I'm going to stress yes here, that maybe it was not in his best interest to remain a part of the class. He might not like to play, yada, yada, yada. This has happened with Alabama and other big schools before. It's not like Georgia's the only one doing it. If that indeed happened, maybe it's the best time to let the recruit know right now, before the guy gets on campus.
I agree.
Sees that he never plays, and then becomes disgruntled and leaves as a transfer, feeling that his college experience from the jump was a little flawed and it wasn't the start they wanted to their 5-year clock of eligibility that they worked so hard for. That's one way of doing it, and maybe it softens it just a little bit. The thing I have problem with, and Brandon, I'm going to just say, I feel more of this stuff will be coming for this class. But I'm going to say this. I have a problem when any school, not just that red and black school everybody here follows, tells that person not to take any other visits, not to look around because he's good, and we definitely want you to be in that class. I don't know if that ever happened with Jalen Perry or not. I'm just saying that's when me, a guy that covers this stuff 24/7, 365 for DawgNation. When that stuff happens, and I know it happened, that's when it really feels like the bile is churning in the stomach right there. That's when you sit there and you go, ouch, this is a dirty, cold-hearted business.
Well, it's definitely a complicated subject. Let me ask you one more question on this point, and then we're going to talk about something different here in a moment. And that is, once again, to go back to the fans who say, oh, this is good news for the players that are likely coming into Georgia now. And one of the names that will come up there is four-star defensive back Tyreek Stevenson. And what a Georgia fan might say to you, Jeff, if you bumped into him on the streets of Athens, or if he had a chance to ask you a question at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com, he would say, this must mean they know they're getting Tyreek Stevenson if they are parting ways with Jalen Perry, or if Jalen Perry sees the writing on the wall and chooses to move off of this himself. This must mean they know they're getting a guy like Tyreek Stevenson. And that's where I want to put my hand in the air and say, well, how much can they really know here when there has been a lot of online chatter about Stevenson in Miami as of late? And when Stevenson himself spoke up on Miami's behalf during an interview this past weekend, how much confidence could Georgia have about a guy like Stevenson right now, who is obviously going to feel some pull from what is very close to a hometown team for him there in Miami? Does Georgia truly know something that we don't when something like this happens, or do they just feel confident about an undecided decision that's eventually going to fall in their favor?
I would say there's a lot of layers to that, Brandon. You can look at simply on the field and look at all the young cornerbacks and the young defensive backs that Georgia's playing right now. Tyson Campbell is a standout. Eric Stokes is a redshirt freshman who also has at least 2 more years at Georgia. You see a guy like Mark Webb Jr. also flourishing in his second season as well. So those are 3 already very young stalwarts at cornerback for the University of Georgia. You also look at this number, Brandon, and it's a cold, hard fact that Georgia is only going to be graduating about 16, 17 guys off this team. So really, if they swap scholarship for scholarship, there's only room for a handful, maybe 17 guys among the scholarship pool in the class of 2019. What needs to happen there? It needs to see guys have great seasons, potentially guys like Isaac Dada, Julian Rochester, Nico Hardman, Riley Ridley, draft-eligible juniors that could then bump that number north upwards of the 20 mark. Georgia would like to sign as many players as it possibly can to push it to that NCAA-mandated cap of 85 scholarship student-athletes for the football program. Probably this program, as we've seen in the past, we can look at history. They also want to make sure that there's a wiggle of about 1 to 2 scholarships every summer for graduate transfers or just transfers in general, like D-Rob, like Jay Hayes, like Maurice Smith in the past. These are the patterns we've seen evolve with Georgia recruiting under Kirby Smart. So I think that might be added to the part. This is the juicy part, Brendan, I guess, was waiting on. Kyer Elam, Tyreek Stevenson. Do the Bulldogs feel really good about those guys? Maybe they're making tighter, stronger inroads now or making room for DJ Daniel even. The other thing you got to think about, given all those defensive backs I just explored earlier that are currently Bulldogs, is maybe Georgia has decided maybe they only need 2 defensive backs this cycle or 3 defensive backs this cycle. Might be 2 safeties, might be 2 corners, and maybe Jalen Perry doesn't fit into this mix, because the other thing we have to mention here, although Jalen Perry was the number 18 cornerback prospect in the country, and most folks, some of even my reporter friends at other beats around the country are like, man, is it really like that at Georgia where they don't have room for the number 165 overall prospect in the country?
Yeah.
And, it leads someone to theorize that because this is a long-standing commitment. This is a guy that's been there for a long time, and he's an in-state commitment. High school coaches, Brandon, they talk like chatty housewives at school over their second mimosa, whatever you want to say. And they know if you do one player dirty and one school dirty, well, that coach will verbalize that all across the state. So Georgia has to be very careful about how it plays scholarship and the very fickle amount of scholarships it has, especially when it comes to an in-state player. Georgia does this in Florida. Georgia does this in Virginia. Georgia does this in Louisiana. Not as big of a deal as it happens inside Gwinnett County, which I know that DawgNation Daily Llama always worries about how well the Bulldogs can recruit in Gwinnett County. They don't need to add more fuel to the fire in the opposite direction of momentum. with everything that's going on around Lawrenceville, Swanee, and Loganville.
Yeah, I think you're giving us a lot to think about when it comes to all of that. I want to talk to you about Jaden Hazelwood coming up in a moment. Before that, though, let me remind you that Jeff's going to be with us on Tuesday for our DawgNation Big Game Preview live at the Marlowe's North Lake. We haven't been to the Marlowe's North Lake for an event before, but this is a really cool Marlowe's. It's a rooftop location. It's 4156 La Vista Road in Tucker. That's 4156 La Vista Road in Tucker. We'll be there from 6 to 8 p.m. this Tuesday, October the 9th. And we'll do the off-air conversation. So for those of you who want to get your unfettered, not fit for print, not made for podcast video comments from Jeff Sintel, the place to do that is at 6 p.m. This upcoming Tuesday night at the Marlowe's in North Lake, and we'll also preview the DawgNation Invasion of Baton Rouge that weekend. So this is going to be a great way to start off a huge week for Georgia, Tuesday night at the Marlowe's at North Lake. Let me give the address one more time, if you don't mind. Let's throw that up on the screen one more time. It's 4156 La Vista Road. 4156 La Vista Road in Tucker at the Marlowe's North Lake, starting at 6 p.m. for our DawgNation Big Game Preview there. All right, Jeff, let me go to Jaden Hazelwood for a moment. There has been a lot of reaction to the interview that you did with Hazelwood on the day that he ultimately decommitted from Georgia. I have seen a lot of folks talking about this, and there are a couple of things that I want to talk to you about in this regard. I guess first and foremost, what is the benefit right now to Hazelwood being an uncommitted player? He was already taking his visits. I think most Georgia fans thought that his recruitment was open no matter if he was committed to Georgia or not. What does he gain now by being uncommitted?
That's a very good question. I think it just allows it to maybe move more freely. And maybe if he does make a trigger decision, I know like the theory is out there. We've had this question asked in our forum. I think you've asked it of me as well. What if he goes down to Miami this weekend and commits to the Hurricanes? Does this make it more of a decommit and then a flip, and then maybe not so much of a clean break? I just think it allows. How about one very telling question I had for Jaden in that interview was, and I put it in one of our DawgNation intels earlier this week, is I said asked if he felt any sort of cover or any sort of relief or protection or maybe some sort of a security blanket by the fact he committed to Georgia in March of his sophomore year. And he said not really, because he said schools still recruit him heavily. They still have always recruited him heavily, even though he's a commitment. But I think that also shows that the communication goes two ways. There's ways to really shut it all down, which is what Dominic Blaylock has done, who I will reiterate on the show here today for I guess the record still should be seen as a very strong commitment to Georgia. Everybody should know that Nolan Smith has been at UGA since Wednesday on his IMG Academy team is off this week, so he had the ability for a break to come by, and he's choosing to spend it in Athens. Been there since Wednesday. We'll be there for the Vanderbilt game on Saturday. So, with Jaden, it's a situation where he did entertain all these offers and he did entertain all these conversations. I think at the end of the day, if everybody's looking for me to make a defining statement on Jaden Hazelwood, I don't think it's there yet, because I don't think Jaden Hazelwood does. Jaden Hazelwood is simply going to look around. He's going to see all the fits, and that's the offensive line, that's the offense, that's the conservative play calling versus the measured haymaker play calling, I guess, is what he's looking for. And then he's going to find out what's the best place for him and what's the best school for him. If the Georgia fan wants to know what Georgia still has in favor for Jaden Hazelwood, you've got to think about the connection to the commitment, the connection to the school. He still says to me it feels like home, and he smiles when he's on campus in Athens like no other place he's on. And he also has the benefit of his good buddy Justin Fields to potentially play with down the road at Georgia as well. But even if he makes a commitment this weekend to Miami, whatever he does with the Auburn official visit, if he takes another official visit to perhaps an LSU or an Ohio State, he's still going to make an official visit to Georgia as well. He's going to compare all those feels that all those visits and those trips get him, and he's going to scout out those situations. And I can say this. I think Jaden Hazelwood will pick the very best decision that he finds, that he researches, and he discovers for the next 3 years of his football career, because this young man has his eyes on the professional football, and he clearly has the talent ability to do so.
All right, can I give you an opinion, Jeff, that may come from too much of an emotional place, and if it does, you can tell me why I'm wrong. But when I look back to this past Saturday, the image of Hazelwood standing with Cortez Hankton on the field, kind of apart from the other recruits, and really getting some one-on-one attention there, and really seeing the warm-ups going on the field, and I would imagine a fairly intimate conversation between Hankton and Hazelwood. And yet in your interview, when you asked Hazelwood about how Georgia would use him, he didn't have a really long and detailed answer on that, which makes me wonder, is his connection with Hankton what it should be right now? Hankton, among the most inexperienced members of Georgia's coaching staff, certainly the most inexperienced on the offensive side of the ball right now. Is that connection with Hankton what it should be? Which is leading me to say this, Jeff. You mentioned Justin Fields a moment ago. Fields and Hazelwood are friends. We know that the coach that was the most instrumental in Fields' recruitment was not his position coach, because at that time James Coley wasn't quarterback's coach yet. It was Dale McGee, the Georgia running backs coach. I feel like it may be time to push the Dale McGee button here. If I'm going to Monday morning quarterback Georgia's recruiting efforts here, if I'm Kirby Smart, I say to Coach Hankton, why don't you work on some 2020 wide receivers for a moment, and let's give Dale McGee a shot at closing the door on Hazelwood here. If I'm Monday morning quarterbacking, that's what I'm doing right now. Do you agree?
I don't agree with that, Brennan, because I guess it goes across the structure of the way Georgia recruits. They have basically when they go out recruiting, they have a recruiter of record for a certain area, a certain territory. And what that guy's there to do is he's there to identify the prospect, identify the talent, invite him out to the school, invite them to a game, and then at some point there will be a handoff to the position coach, where basically those two guys will then work in tandem. On the recruit, of course, Dale McGee is a masterful recruiter. He's an ace recruiter. But I think maybe the big thing with Georgia, he's been committed for so long now. It was a 19-month commitment to Hazelwood. And I found it very interesting and maybe even a little troublesome that Georgia had never clearly defined his role as anything more than an X receiver. Other people, Miami's painting the picture that he could be the next A.J. Green, because Mark Richt led the offense and called the plays in the offense. It was a part of the offensive system that propelled A.J. Green to the NFL. That's a guy that, rightfully so, A.J. Green gets compared to a lot in prospect circles, in recruiting circles, and even the all-time greatest receiver in Georgia football history, at least on the statistical sheet. Terrence Edwards said he's the best receiver on our Before the Hedges program on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Terrence Edwards said that A.J. Green is the best receiver he's seen. And Jaden Hazelwood is the best receiver he's seen since A.J. Green as well. So I don't know if it's the time to push the Dell button. I know it would probably make everybody feel a lot better, like this is Pulp Fiction, and they finally decide to call in the wolf to clean up that incident on the upholstery of the vehicle, and now they have to fix things. But, if Georgia wants to build, maybe not our Death Star, but maybe that John Wick, maybe that Indiana Jones type recruiting class, the one that defeats every obstacle and lays waste to everything in its way, I think they do need to have Jaden Hazelwood in there. And I think what Georgia might show Jaden on the field, especially in big games, is going to go a long ways toward that. And it will be very interesting to see what happens with Jaden Hazelwood going forward, as well as this 2019 recruiting class, because there's going to be some plot twists. And I don't mean they're all going to be fireworks like Independence Day, or they're all going to be happy endings either.
All right, so let me do one more thing before we let you go, because I've already kept you really late, and I apologize for that. But you mentioned Nolan Smith. For our video audience, I'll show you some footage here that Nolan put out on his Instagram of him being at UGA, having a good time and enjoying himself there a little bit. So good stuff from Nolan Smith there in Athens here this week. Jeff, given the fact that Smith is one of these recruits that never quite seems to stop having some rumors connected to his name. Obviously, he's pretty active on Twitter, sometimes tweeting about other schools from time to time. What's the significance of having Smith here in Athens for what might be an extended visit, as far as I know? What is what's the significance of that in your mind?
Well, it can only help, Brandon. I mean, this guy, I think recently he's been to a basketball practice as well. He visited that recruiting lounge where they have the stock market type ticker that relays all the big contracts that Georgia alumni, former Bulldogs have signed for in the NFL. Nolan, in his own certain unique way, has always been the leader of this class. And it's maybe not so much in headlines, and it's maybe not so much in his Twitter account, but he was the guy that was always encouraging guys to come play with him. He brought out names like Andrew Booth and Trayvon Walker. He continually tries to recruit for the class in his own certain specific way as well. And maybe it's not Richard McCount, maybe it's not Jake Fromm, maybe it's not the way Justin Fields was on the fly in the 2018 cycle. But in his own way, I think Nolan Smith, regardless of the way, regardless of him being now the longest tenured commitment going back to January of 2017, he's kind of always been the alpha dog in this class. And, all those rumors, Brandon, it's just part of the territory. When you have a player as good as these guys, Jaden Hazelwood, Nolan Smith, there's going to be rumors, there's going to be innuendo. There's some guys out there that are trying to make a living by writing headlines about this and that and connecting the team they cover to a five-star, an incredible prospect like Nolan Smith as well. And you just gotta go with it, Brandon. I know a lot of people wonder about it, worry about it, and it's the stuff that makes for good talk shows like this one and forum posts and everything else like that. But when a recruit decides to spend 5 days, extended days on his fall break at the University of Georgia and not going on another official visit to another school, that has to bode well for the program.
I think that's well said, Jeff. We'll look forward to seeing you Tuesday at the Marlows in North Lake for our DawgNation Big Game Preview, looking into the DawgNation Invasion. That is going to be a lot of fun starting at 6 p.m. right there on La Vista Road in Tucker. And I'll see you on Saturday in Athens before the game for our Kroger kickoff, after the game for our Northside Hospital post-game show. Jeff, the real season is upon us here. Night game on Saturday night. Huge stretch for the Dogs after that. And a whole bunch of fun with the 2019 recruiting class as well. I can't wait for it, Jeff, and we appreciate you being a part of it with us.
Yeah, Brandon, it's good talking to everybody. See everybody in Athens on Saturday, and homecoming day for everybody in Athens. Make sure everybody comes out.
Good stuff, Jeff.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
We'll have to give Jeff time and a half for that one. I believe we eclipsed the 25-minute mark with Mr. Centel there. So appreciate y'all sticking around for it, and appreciate Jeff for giving us such good information. But that's three big issues that I wanted to make sure we touched on. Aftermath of the Jaden Hazelwood stuff, potential intrigue with Nolan Smith, and maybe Georgia heading some of that off at the pass with a pretty extended visit here this week while IMG's on a break. And, of course, the fallout from the Jalen Perry stuff. And I think really separating fact from fiction there, because there's a lot of street logic and street knowledge when it comes to some of this recruiting stuff, whether it be the maybe not so plugged in, group who may be really worried about what this means when it's two decommitments in the span of a brief period of time. But there's also, I think, sometimes the abundance of confidence from Georgia fans who assume that every setback is only a precursor to the ultimate breakthrough, and sometimes I think there's some skepticism about how true that really is too. So I appreciate Jeff kind of coming in and kind of giving you a little bit of both of those. I appreciate that from Jeff here when it comes to that. So really good stuff there. All right, we got Tom Hart from the SEC Network coming up in just a minute. Before we get to that, though, let me do a couple things for SEC Through. First of all, remind you that it's a big weekend in the world of sports. That means it's time for you to get some big action now when it comes to MyBookie. Not just picking individual winners in college football, but you can get the parlay stuff down. As I've explained before, if you've never done the parlay thing, it's a little bit like playing roulette or something like that, where you can put a little bit of money down and have a chance to win a lot. You can pick three winners together, and let's face it, all of us can find 3 games on the board or something like that we might like. But you can pick three winners there on the board, and all of a sudden you turn in what could be like a $100 bet into like a $600 bet, a win, or something along those lines. MyBookie gives you a chance to do that. You can also get in on the playoff baseball, the Conor McGregor MMA fight this weekend. It is just a busy time in the world of sports, and watching it all is more fun when you've got action, especially at MyBookie, because MyBookie is known as the no-hassle payout when you win, folks. And right now, an even better offer than that. When you find MyBookie online, that's MyBookie, when you find MyBookie online, and you use the promo code DawgNation, your first deposit can be matched dollar for dollar. But you got to do it right now. I've been told that this offer is going to go away here at a certain point. I don't know when. They don't tell me when, but they just said, BA, tell folks to hurry. So I would say act right now. Take advantage of that. First deposit can be matched dollar for dollar when you use the promo code DawgNation at MyBookie. And then after that, you play, you win, you get paid. It is simple as that. Let's look at the top SEC games here this weekend for a moment, because I think there's a lot of interesting stuff taking place in these games. Alabama at Arkansas. Arkansas has played better as of late. Now, it has not shown up in the final score. They haven't won games, but they were close with Texas A&M a week ago. They were closer than the experts would have thought against Auburn the week before that. Are they good enough to keep it close against Alabama on Saturday? I would say no, but this is a place in which Alabama has struggled within the last half decade or so, so probably not a whole lot of intrigue around Alabama, Arkansas. Missouri, South Carolina, though, does offer some of that. This is a chance for Drew Lock to really cement his status as more than just a draft guy, right? I mean, he's a draft darling as of right now, but is he more than that? The game against South Carolina would go a long way towards saying that. And you've got other big games in the SEC as well. LSU at Florida, I think, is a really compelling game. I don't like Florida. I'm a Gator hater, but you got to give credit where credit's due. They did play better in winning at Mississippi State, but I do like LSU in this game. I think Kentucky, Texas A&M will go a long way towards determining just how much of a real threat Kentucky could be to Georgia in the SEC East. They are an underdog, don't forget, at Texas A&M. That should be a fun one to watch. And then Auburn at Mississippi State. This is really a put up or shut up for both these teams, who have really struggled more than I think their fan bases would like, but probably a game in which Auburn sort of reasserts itself. So those are the big games happening around the SEC. There are also a couple top national games that I want you to pay close attention to for potential ramifications for the SEC and for Georgia in particular. One of those is Miami at Florida State, because Jaden Hazelwood is going to be there, and it's a chance to see if Miami does throw the ball around with N'Kosi Perry more. You know, do they get that passing offense involved? That'll be worth paying attention to. Texas, Oklahoma is just kind of a fun game. Red River Shootout, or I guess Red River Rivalry they call it there. That's always kind of a fun game. Our buddy Connor Riley, by the way, is taking the underdog here. He's taking Texas to win the game, so we'll see how that plays out. And then I've talked about Notre Dame a couple times on this show as a threat to Georgia or the other SEC team as far as two teams in the college football playoff. Virginia Tech is ranked right now. Let's see if Notre Dame can keep up its winning ways at 8 p.m. on Saturday night. Kind of a fun national game. We'll make that your SEC through and enjoy Tom Hart right now. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza, it is great to have the voice that you'll hear Saturday night on the SEC Network, along with Jordan Rogers and Cole Kublik. Tom Hart back here again on DawgNation Daily. Tom, thanks for your time. We appreciate you being with us today. How you doing?
I'm fantastic, Brandon. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm excited about the conversation, and this will be your first chance, I guess, to see Georgia here in 2018. I know you've watched a lot of film and read about the Dogs leading up to this game on Saturday night. What have you made of undefeated Georgia thus far that maybe hasn't satisfied every wish that fans would have had through 5 games? What's your take on Georgia thus far?
Well, I think it's to be careful what you wish for. Are you going to see the glass half empty or half full? And I would just caution fans to, I know nobody wants to hear this, but it's really hard to appreciate this Georgia team, or any team in college football for that matter, if you're judging them directly with what's going on in Tuscaloosa right now. I mean, what's going on in Tuscaloosa and with Tua is otherworldly. I mean, he is off to a Hall of Fame start. So if you just erase them from the equation and you say, hey, where has this program been, where are we, and what's in our near future, I don't know how you couldn't be excited about what Georgia is doing. Or do they have the same number of elite defenders that they had last year? No, not yet. Is it easy to replace the most prolific running back duo in college football history? No, it's almost impossible. But that doesn't mean that the guys you have aren't able to make plays. And so in short, Georgia is a team that is among the elite already, and they are going to be much better on the field in the last half of the season than they were in the first half. There's growth that has to occur, and you can see it occurring every week, even though it's not perfect, even though they've been scored upon, even though, they haven't scored on every single possession. Pump the brakes. This is an elite team in college football, and there's not a whole lot of them out there.
How fascinated are you with the potential of the Jake Fromm, Justin Fields storyline on Saturday? As you know, Fields didn't play much against Missouri, just the one snap, but had 2 touchdowns last week against Tennessee and seemed like is now kind of a part of the game plan here. I would expect both guys to play on Saturday. How interesting is all of that for you and your broadcast partners on Saturday night?
It's fascinating. It's fascinating because what Fields brings to the table is different from what Fromm has. I mean, obviously, and you don't take anything away from a guy who got you the national championship game. But in the era of college football where you're trying to get advantages with numbers in the running game, you have a quarterback that provides that. Offensive line has been banged up. Once again, you're trying to replace Michelle and Chubb, which is almost impossible. So you're able to put a quarterback out there that adds to your run game, and it gives you an advantage in the box when it comes to numbers. And, oh, by the way, it's not like he's one-dimensional. He can throw the ball, too. So I appreciate how Kirby has brought him along, and I think, and I'll be at practice this afternoon. I haven't seen it with my own eyes yet, but if I were a betting man, I would say that we're going to start to see more and more of Fields, not just in the game, but significantly part of the game plan when it comes to his running. The only thing outside of injury that would get in the way of that is if this running back core just takes off, and that could be any one of four guys, obviously. But if somebody separates themselves as a go-to back that is dependable and can also give you chunk plays, then maybe they don't need a running quarterback in that threat as much. But I think it's more likely that we see more of a running quarterback than we do one of the running backs separate themselves.
On the other side of the field here for a moment, we had a member of the Vanderbilt broadcast team on the show yesterday, and I told him, I said, it's been weird with Vanderbilt this year. They played close at Notre Dame, but also played close with Tennessee State. Handled some non-conference opponents to start the season, but kind of got handled by South Carolina, who hasn't handled much of anybody other than the Commodores here. What do you make of Vanderbilt right now?
It's weird to say that Vandy is in a rebuilding mode because, you just don't, no disrespect, we just don't speak of them in that way, okay? They're not the Philadelphia 76ers, but they had a lot of turnover, and this is a very young team. So they're arguably more talented than they've been in quite some time, but with that youth comes inconsistency, and I think that's what we're seeing day in and day out. And speaking with their coaches, that's what they see on the practice field day in and day out. They've got a fantastic quarterback, but kind of like Georgia when it comes to the running game, it's been a banged-up and shuffled offensive line. It's been a rotation of running backs, and they're having to replace, instead of a two-headed monster like Georgia had, they're having to replace one guy in Ralph Webb,
Sure,
who was the most durable running back that we've seen in the last 10 years in college football, and he did a lot of stuff for them. Does that mean that the guys that are there now aren't capable of breakaway plays and have breakaway speed? No, and without disrespect to Webb, there's a chance that the guys that are there now are more talented than him. But it's a matter of having inexperienced and young players in positions where you're asking for consistency, and very rarely is consistency delivered from young players.
Hey, before we let you go, you've seen Kentucky twice, including this past Saturday. They're now 13th, I guess, in the AP poll. That's a road game for Georgia in November. After having seen them up close and personal a couple of times, how for real are the Wildcats right now?
They're absolutely for real. To be critical of them, their one weakness is in the kicking game right now. I mean, how many teams in college football would take that comment, that your only weakness is in the kicking game? The interior offensive line is very good. Their quarterback play has been dynamic at times. Benny Snell, I believe, is the best running back in college football. They've got playmakers at every level of the defensive side, and they've got length in the secondary. One thing to watch with Kentucky as you watch them play is how much better they are. Now, here's one caveat. They got very conservative in their play calling in the second half against South Carolina, so the numbers don't do justice. But how much better they are than their opposition in the fourth quarter. To use a baseball analogy, a rising fastball doesn't really rise. It just stays on plane longer than other pitches. Teams, players, running backs, linebackers, they don't get stronger in the fourth quarter. They just hold their endurance and strength better than those that are on the field with them. So in that respect, Benny Snell gets stronger the later the game goes. He's great in the fourth quarter. Josh Allen, and I haven't crunched the numbers on this, but I bet if you did, that 75% or more of his sacks have come in the fourth quarter this season. Mm-hmm. He makes plays late in game when offensive lines and others get tired. He's having an All-American season at defensive end.
Benny Snell is having an All-American season at running back, and they are a tough, blue-collar, physical team that finally has an SEC-sized offensive line. I think they are the second-best team in the East, no doubt, and there's, as good as Georgia is, we all know that if you're an elite team, or you're a really good team, let's put it like that, you can beat an elite team on any given Saturday. They don't have to be better than Georgia for 13 games. They only have to be better than them for 3 hours, and that's certainly possible in my mind.
A big test for Georgia in November. Before that, it's Saturday night, home game for Georgia under the lights in Sanford Stadium on the SEC Network. Tom Hart, Cole Kubelik, Jordan Rogers on the call. Tom, we appreciate your time on DawgNation Daily here today, and we'll look forward to seeing you Saturday night on the SEC Network.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks for having me. And if you want to stick around for more, always after the game, late Saturday night, after all the games are over and you're looking for a fill of college football, we're also doing SEC The Weekend on the SEC Network Twitter handle and on social media. So if you want to see some guys loosen their ties and tell you what they really think, you can do that as we wrap up everything late Saturday night.
Yeah, I've seen that. You guys have a lot of fun doing that. First of all, Cole's a guy that has a lot of opinions. Jordan's got a lot of opinions too, and you love the sport as well. So watching you guys interact there has been a lot of fun. Although I will tell you before we let you go that Jordan Rogers has upset a couple Georgia fans from time to time with some of his evaluations of Jake Fromm. So I'm sure Georgia fans will be tuning in with keen interest to find out how Rogers, the former quarterback, evaluates Fromm here on Saturday night, both online and on TV there, I guess, as well, Tom.
Yeah, he can be a lightning rod. Just understand that it comes from hours and hours of film study, and it's an educated opinion. And I do think it's fascinating that you could talk about Jake Fromm being in the bottom half of the SEC in terms of quarterbacks and quarterback play, given everything that he's accomplished and all the respect that he has earned. So we might get into that Saturday night.
Y'all are a great broadcast team, terrific chemistry. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll look forward to seeing you in Athens, all right?
Brandon, thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
So really good stuff there from Tom Hart. Will call the game on SEC Network on Saturday night, and it is a good broadcast team. Jordan Rogers, Cole Kubelik, they're all just a terrific chemistry between that group there. Looking forward to seeing them on the SEC Network, and I know that many of you are much like me. You are at the game on Saturday, you're watching that, and then you're back home on, whether it be Sunday, early morning, some of you are late Saturday night, some of you don't get to it till Monday, but you're rewatching that game on TV after the fact. I'm kind of right there in the same boat with you. A lot of these games, I go back and end up rewatching over and over and over again. So it'll be fun to watch that group and hear what they have to say about Georgia on Saturday night. And yeah, I'm sure some of y'all will be needling Jordan Rogers for some of his comments about the quarterbacks, but that just par for the course there. That's a pretty good group to have doing the game on Saturday. Let me also say this, 22 days from right now, Georgia goes back to Jacksonville, beats Florida again. It's our Gator Hater Countdown right here on DawgNation Daily. And don't forget, UGA basketball fans, Stegmania tonight, kicking off the basketball season for UGA. We'll see you Monday right here on DawgNation Daily. And that was our longest show in quite a while. But I thought it was really fun. We had to go along with Jeff because there was a lot to get to. Loved having Tom Hart on the show. And yes, it was the quick change. Do y'all ever go to NBA games, the quick change duo where the gal in the dress, she changes her dress 40 different times over the course of a halftime show? That's kind of what I am, where I throw the confetti up in the air, and then when it lands, I'm wearing a different shirt. That's kind of my deal there. So obviously, it's easy to tell if you're watching the show that, yes, we did pre-record the interview with Tom Hart the same way we pre-recorded the one with Brad Nessler the other day. It's sometimes a little bit easier to do that as opposed to trying to fit two interviews within a live show, especially given my propensity for asking Jeff 76 questions over the course of a 20-minute span. So so that in that case, that's kind of where that comes from. We pre-record that. Honestly, the truth is, had I thought about it, I should have just brought a different shirt for the Tom Hart interview, and nobody would have ever been any the wiser. But I'm also one of those guys that I don't necessarily like pulling the wool over your guys' eyes too much when it comes to stuff like that. So, yes, the Tom Hart interview was pre-recorded, but hopefully you had a good time on that. All right, so we've already kind of gone overtime here, but I do on a Friday want to get some time for comments. So if my folks will let me, I will I'll take as many comments on both Facebook and YouTube as I can here in the time that we have. And maybe I'll try to do this like our buddy Jeff Sintel likes to do on Before the Hedges on Wednesday. Maybe I'll do this in somewhat rapid-fire format where I'll try to respond to as many as I can. give you more time to talk, and I will do my best to try to shut up just a little bit. Santiago Diarn says Braves have to win tonight, or it may be done by Sunday. Yeah, I was real disappointed in that last night because here's the thing, and this is going to already kind of get me off track in terms of being brief with my answers. My son's a big sports fan, but I haven't quite gotten him to be convinced to cheer for the teams that I cheer for yet, especially in professional sports. He's mostly a Georgia football fan, but in professional sports, he's like one of the worst. He's only 6, so you got to understand that first of all. But he's like one of these bandwagon guys. He's whatever team is winning, that's the team that he likes at that moment. But last night, right before he went to bed, he stayed up a little late. We settled in, watched a little bit of Braves baseball. And I just want the Braves to do well so I can get him indoctrinated in being, a fan of the teams that I like. And then you got, Fultonevich can't throw a strike. He's given up 900 home runs. I'm like, is it so hard to have this go well, have a nice moment with my son? So, yeah, I was already thinking about that. Kibo Weir asked about an update on Ben Cleveland. Cleveland's still a few weeks away from being back. There's no doubt about that. But when he gets back, and I won't pretend to be enough of a medical expert right now to know when he will or when he won't, but it's definitely not going to be for the next couple of weeks. You're thinking about playing some big games without Cleveland, I would assume, LSU included here. So good comment from Kibo. Let me check on the YouTube side of things here for a moment. Green Soldier says, how is Monty Rice's knee? Is he good to go? So Monty Rice's knee, I saw him in on a couple plays last Saturday, which I would assume that he's going to be in there on some more this Saturday, and obviously it'll be a big part of what happens against LSU. Right now, I believe that Rice is Georgia's best run-stopping linebacker. That's a guy that I think Georgia has to have there in that spot in that moment. And when you think about taking on some of these more physical teams, especially November and Benny Snell, when you think about that game, Monty Rice is the guy that you think about. It's a different kind of player than Roquan Smith. He's not the sideline-to-sideline speed the way that Roquan Smith is, but he is that thumper in the middle there who can make it more difficult to run. And then there's a part of me that also kind of looks ahead to the future. Imagine next year when Rice is in his 3rd year in the program, not a superstar player probably, but a really solid linebacker and a big physical presence there. Imagine him playing next to a runner like Channing Tindall. By sophomore season, Tindall's probably a pretty big impact player, I would assume. He's already starting to show some flashes. Jeff Santel's written about that. Imagine Tindall and Monty Rice standing side by side in that linebacker court. That could get really fun. That could be really something worth paying attention to. G. Gray says Fields is more talented than Tua. I really don't think so. I think it still remains to be seen how all of those quarterbacks play out. Both with the ones on the Georgia roster and with the ones on the other rosters. I think we're a long way away from getting much determination on that. Brian Kephart says, B.A., what aspects of the team or position group do you think shine or develops more, becomes even greater bright spot after seeing the Vandy game? That, for me, is one of the things that I'm really looking for from Vanderbilt. And at the risk of calling it a tune-up game and have y'all come yell at me if Georgia barely squeaks by on Saturday saying that I was guilty of overlooking the game, I do think that the real season for Georgia in some respects begins on Saturday night. First of all, because Vanderbilt may not be an A-list opponent, but SEC Network at 7:30 on a Saturday night, that's a pretty A-list environment where you're going to get, the light-up Sanford for the first time this year. You're going to get just an incredibly loud crowd, cool, little cooler temperatures. The whole thing's going to feel really good. And a lot of us, I think, will be watching the game to see a couple of things kind of shored up to really look at how it's going to go during the real stretch run that probably begins the following week at LSU. An example of this is, remember Georgia struggling against the run against Missouri? And part of that, I think we would assume, is because Georgia was obviously having to key on a really good quarterback, Drew Lock. Well, Vanderbilt's got a pretty good quarterback of its own in Kyle Shermer there. So can Georgia stay rock solid against the pass, against a pretty good quarterback, while also stepping up with more limited personnel, because you got to think about the back seven here, more limited personnel and stop the run? Now, Vanderbilt doesn't have Ralph Webb anymore, so that's a little bit easier. But can that group stay solid after, I think, doing a better job against Tennessee than it had done against Missouri? The other thing here is, can this defense find some havoc play, whether it be tackles for loss, sacks, forced turnovers, even though that's probably a little bit more difficult to control than the stuff in the backfield. Can this defense do some of that? That'll make you feel better heading into LSU. And then probably more so than anything else, the thing I'm paying the most attention to on Saturday is tomorrow. What happens when this team chooses to run the football on first down? Pay attention to that. Can Georgia set itself up for short fields? Can it get at least 5 yards on 1st and 10? I just think that's a very big deal. Now, the most entertaining aspect of all of this will be what happens with Jake Fromm and Justin Fields. But the more nuts and bolts issue in terms of determining Georgia's future success in future games, I believe is going to come down to how it handles the scenario with those first down runs, because that was an area for the season Georgia hasn't been great, and for the Saturday against Tennessee a week ago is even worse than its season average here. That's a stat that hides below the surface right now of something that Georgia needs to improve on. Good question. Over here on YouTube, once again, Cliff Payne says about Justin Fields that he's taller, thicker, and faster than Tua Tagovailoa. I've researched this before. Also, Fields faced better competition in high school and was lights out in the 7-on-7 competition as a better passer than Trevor Lawrence. Yeah, and Cliff, I'm going to respond to that once again by saying when it comes to Lawrence and Tua and Fields and Fromm and a lot of these guys, I just think it remains to be seen. I obviously have been very impressed with Tua Tagovailoa and heard for a year last year that he was already better than Jalen Hurts. So I think that what Tua Tagovailoa has done for the most part speaks for itself. The numbers validate the attention that he's getting. However, I'm always weary of too much too soon. I'm always weary of these moments in which we can write how the season's going to end. How many gigantic favorites for the Heisman Trophy have ended up not winning the award? Now, over the last couple of years, we've seen some examples of where the early season favorite did hold on and win the award. But there have been a lot of other examples, and the majority of the examples going back for a long time, of big, heavy favorites for the Heisman Trophy just faltering at some point. I mean, go back to as recently as a couple of years ago. Leonard Fournette, in late October, early November, was about as much of a lock to be a Heisman Trophy winner as anyone could have been, and yet he didn't win the award and really kind of fell flat on his face in the final month of the season, with all due respect to Fournette, but that's kind of the way that played out. And that's obviously a different position than quarterback, and it's obviously a different year and a completely different scenario. But these obvious predictions, both in terms of Alabama winning the national championship and Tua Tagovailoa winning the Heisman Trophy, these obvious predictions have a way of not ending up quite as obvious as they appeared at one point in time. That could be wishful thinking from a person like me who admittedly would love to see Alabama falter, or it could be another in a long trend of college football just not being easy to predict. Back over here on Facebook for a moment. Philip Jordan Wells says 201 because he knew that that Georgia had some suspect stuff in its secondary. Maybe that's the case, but this was also a group that got Georgia to a national championship game a year ago, and it was one play, one bad breakdown. It ends up being kind of lionized forever on oil paintings and a part of college football lore here, and Alabama's trolled Georgia with the second 26 thing. But while the ramifications will live on forever, it was still just one play. So I don't want to be too hard on the guys that gave it up. Matt Rukavina says, BA, I think we really see a different Georgia team this weekend because of the night atmosphere. It makes a big difference. Yeah, I think we'll see a difference in the fan base. I mean, one of the subjects I was going to talk about on the regular show this week, and we really just never really had a time to, was it has been a weird year for the SEC when it comes to student attendance. Nick Saban had his rant that he went on about students not coming to their game last Saturday against an overmatched opponent. You may have seen this week that Dan Mullen has been encouraging Florida students to fill up the game for LSU. Now, that is mind-boggling to me that we're in an era in which a coach like Mullen has to recruit students to come to a game against what has really become a huge rivalry here between Florida and LSU. There's a lot of legitimate bad blood there. You'd think that students wouldn't need a lot of extra coaxing to get there, but clearly Mullen thinks they do. Otherwise, he wouldn't be, doing what he's doing. And it's easy to want to laugh at Florida or mock Nick Saban, but the truth is, I got to tell you, after the initial excitement wore off this past Saturday, I'm talking about for like the first quarter or so. After that, the environment in Sanford Stadium was not that great. And I'm not trying to pick a fight here. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. But there were a lot of students that just left that game, especially the 300 level above the lower level student section, that level up there. I mean, they were just gone. They were just gone. And by the time you got to halftime, there were just empty rows of bleachers up there. And I get it. It was hot. And it has been hot all season long. And I'm really glad that tomorrow's not a day game because it's going to be 90 degrees again. And that particular spot's right in the sun. I get all of that. But we are kind of in a unique time here where even at a place like Georgia where it can get really cranked up, and obviously the student body just in general is pretty fired up for Georgia football. I mean, I felt like the atmosphere for a lot of the game on Saturday was a little bit lacking. And in South Carolina, I mean, I've told you before that I thought that Williams-Brice Stadium was one of the most intense atmospheres that I've ever seen Georgia travel into over the course of decades. Williams-Brice Stadium has been that way. That stadium never got full for the Georgia-South Carolina game. Now, maybe they just thought that Georgia was going to blow them out. Maybe that's the case. It was also really hot that day as well. But there were huge pockets of the upper level of that stadium that never got full. It never really felt like that, Williams-Brice Stadium breathing down your neck, crowd right there on top of the field. It never quite felt that way. When the stadium is not completely full, the environment is somewhat different. So I'm hoping to see a raucous environment from Sanford Stadium on Saturday night because it just feels like Georgia's been, about to come to the halfway point of the season, and that hasn't quite happened yet. We know it'll come against Auburn. That's a much bigger game. We know Georgia's going to face an intense atmosphere at LSU in a couple of weeks, but I'm really looking forward to Sanford Stadium being at its best on Saturday night. Tavares Taylor says, it's not hot in my house in my recliner, and it's cheaper. Yeah, listen, Tavares, I think a lot of people would agree with you on that for sure. I don't think anybody would disagree with that, or at least a lot of the folks who choose to watch the games from home. That has become a very attractive option. Nakia Hester says maybe the heat's the cause of the lackluster season. JY says, BA, do you think the coaches listen to comments like Hazelwood's comment on conservative play calling, and do they make changes because of the recruit statement? Do they weigh that kind of thing at all, do you think? I think that's a good question. I think that Kirby is very aware of recruiting, and I think that in the heat of the moment, I don't think that he has Jaden Hazelwood on his mind, or nor do I think that Jim Chaney does. But I do think that one of the things that makes Kirby want to play a lot of players, for instance, is the fact that it's a way to keep the current guys happy and to be able to say, hey, look, you see, we played 21 freshmen on Saturday, or whatever the number ends up being in a given season, especially early in the season. I think that Kirby has built a program that makes recruiting easier to do by making the location and destination seem attractive. And that means for wide receivers and skill position players, how they'll be using the offense, that's a part of that too. So I don't think that Kirby and the offensive coaching staff are ignorant to that, even if they don't dial up play specifically with Hazelwood in mind on Saturday. They're clearly aware that wide receivers want to catch the football. That's something that even if they don't admit that they are, that's something that they are clearly, I would think, thinking about. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming, by the way, we are going to get ready to sign off here in just a minute. Jennifer Stevenson Fleming says, I think Jaden comes back. Miami's not going to throw it either. Yeah, I mentioned this a moment ago during the regular show, that watch Miami, Florida State on Saturday. I mean, the truth is, like N'Kosi Perry, even in taking over, his passing stats haven't been that great, have they? I mean, I don't know what they are. But, against a Florida State team that's fighting for its season, Willie Taggart may be fighting for his career for all we know. Does Miami still throw the ball and show Jaden Hazelwood what he wants to see there? Now, the Miami lifestyle is something that's very hard to compete with, if that's indeed what's attractive for Hazelwood. When it comes to the two offenses, I like a lot of you, I don't think that the Miami passing offense is necessarily all that great. Don Williams says, watch Florida State beat Miami. Don, I could see that happening as well, or at least be closer than the expert thing. Although Florida State is really not good, but I understand where you're coming from on that. All right, we are going to get ready to get out of here. Cameron Merrill says Fields not a 2020. Apparently that's his presidential ticket. I like the idea of that. All right, we got to get ready to go. Let me see if there's anything else we need to hit right before we get out of here. Nakia Hester says, let's face facts. Hazelwood saw something he didn't like at the game last week. What was it? So you may be right, Nakia, on that, but go back and watch the interview with Jeff. Hazelwood is a pretty difficult guy to read. And so if you watch that video and you don't come away completely knowing how he feels about certain things, I think it also becomes difficult to say, oh, well, he clearly was at Georgia on Saturday, clearly didn't like something, and then decided to decommit. I don't know that with Hazelwood the dots are that easy to connect. And by the way, he doesn't owe us any, at least from my perspective, any more openness than that. He can choose to be private about this and go about this in his own way. That's certainly his right and certainly his freedom. And as many of you have said in the comment section already today, I hope he comes back. I do. I want Jaden Hazelwood catching touchdown passes at Georgia because I think he's going to catch a lot of them. Right now, though, he is, I think, a pretty difficult player to figure out. He's not necessarily wishy-washy like some of these recruits can be. Sometimes when we say, oh, he's difficult to figure out, that means he changes his mind a lot. I think Hazelwood may be one of these guys that sometimes keeps his true feelings, a little bit close to the vest. And so it's obviously weird to have a guy decommit on the heels of a visit. But there's no way of really knowing, I think, right now exactly what was the precipice for this. But we can all assume that a better, more aggressive passing attack from Georgia would obviously be more attractive for Hazelwood here. All right, so we got to get ready to go. We are as late as we've, I think, ever ended an episode of DawgNation Daily. Somebody a moment ago in the comment section said, if you'd start at 10, you'd be off the air by 11. We were only about 5 minutes late today, and we still were over by, a good bit of time by the time the reason why the show ran long today is because I spoke to Jeff for 25 minutes. But obviously, we are always trying to get back as close to 10 as we can possibly get. All right. Thank you all very much. Busy day for us tomorrow. It starts for us around 5 p.m. or so, and I say approximately because we're going to go on the air about 15 or 20 minutes before the dog walk for our Kroger kickoff show. Jeff and I will preview everything set to happen between Georgia and Vanderbilt tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow night. And then we'll be immediately after the game for our Northside Hospital post-game show, where we'll break down all the action from the game live there from the UGA bookstore. Really excited about that. And then we'll have the podcast version of this show up in just a moment. If you missed any portion of this marathon event, you'll have that in podcast form on all the various podcast channels, including the Apple Podcast Player and the Google Podcast Player in just a moment. We'll have DN90 here as well. And then back again on Monday, talking about everything that happened against Vanderbilt and looking ahead to DawgNation Invasion. We'll see you then for DawgNation Daily, presented by Marco's Pizza. Y'all have a great weekend, everybody.